Witam Państwa serdecznie, Błażej Hrabkowicz. To jest 31. edycja festiwalu EnergaCAMERIMAGE w Toruniu. Our guests are director Rebeccą Miller, hello.
Hello.
And actor Peter Dinklage.
Hello.
Hello, how are you? Everything okay?
Wonderful.
Wonderful. So
Enjoying your
happy to
time
be
here?
Yes, brief, but absolutely lovely.
Yeah. Rebecca, first question is going to be, from me, is going to be, I have to ask it because I'm a huge Bruce Springsteen fan. And he wrote a song, Addicted to Romance, for your film. So tell me, what was your first reaction when you heard the song, and your first reaction when actually Bruce Springsteen agreed to write a song for a film?
Well, I was on a road trip from between Ohio to New York on my own, driving, and I stopped in a terrible motel, and I was sitting there. It was very depressing, and I got a call from Bruce Springsteen and his wife Patty Schialfa, saying,
Hi, it's Bruce.
Hi, it's Bruce, and that he loved the film so much, and he said, what can I do? He loved it so much. They were both screaming. And so he said, what can I do? What would you like me to do? And I said, well, if you were I would love an original song, like if you want, but of course I could just maybe use one of your old songs. And he said, give me 3 days and let me see what I come up with, a little time. And like 3 days later, he had written the song. And he wrote it in bed, I think, and like on it, sort of like played around, just wrote it in bed. And he was like playing around with his guitar, and it came to him. And in a way, it was like very much like the story in our film of Peter becoming inspired by Marissa Tomei's character, in that he was inspired after not having written for quite a long time to write a song. So it was like the great gift of the universe.
Yeah, and
What a perfect setting too. You're on the side of at a motel, on the side of a highway.
Yeah.
That feels like a Bruce Springsteen song in and of itself.
exactly. It should have been in Nebraska, and it will be even more fitting. Yes. But listen, but just an easy thing to do. 3 days, I'll write the song. Brilliant, good.
Well, he said, "Let me see." He didn't know if he would, but then it came.
So, Peter, you play a composer in a film, a composer with a writer's block, but it's also a love story. So tell me about your character, and when you read the script, what was the most important thing for you in this character? Something you would definitely latch onto as an actor, just to base this character on.
Well, the first thing I always look, you can have the greatest idea for a film, but I always go, okay, but show me the dialogue. How do people interact? And Rebecca has such a beautiful ear for dialogue, how people relate, and how different the characters are. Sometimes you read a script and it sounds like it's coming from the same voice because it's the one writer, but she manages to really find all the different voices. And I think it's I loved about my character is he is coming from a real success. And sometimes when you come from success, you want to redefine yourself even more. It's like they say a good review can, at least for an actor, a good review can be more damaging than a bad review. When you're doing a play, if you read a great review, then you get a little bit, you can take it the wrong direction with that. And what Stephen, this character that Rebecca beautifully wrote, is he's at a crossroads, and he's coming from great success, so there's a lot of expectation put on him, and he doesn't know what to do with that because he's very smart and creative. So that success has unfortunately drained him of the creativity. I can relate to, I did a big successful TV show for many years. And
that's what I wanted to ask you.
Yeah, and once you're done with that,
yeah.
Once you're finished that, people have an expectation on you to continue that perhaps. And that's the last thing you want to do, no matter how much of a great experience you had doing that. You have to, as an artist, you want to move on to something completely different. And I think that's also what Stephen does. And he can't find it until it finds him. Mm-hmm. Like the muse finds you. It's that age-old question of do you control the art, or does the art eventually control you?
So you actually put a lot of your experiences into this character.
Well, I tried to. We're very different, but that's what you try to do, at least.
Yeah. Peter touched upon the subject of creativity, of art, and where actually does it come from? And I feel that it's one of the themes of the film, but it's also a love story. It's also kind of romantic comedy, and I love romantic comedies, so this is a compliment from me. But these two themes, love romantic themes and the nature of creativity. Was that something that you really focused on?
Yeah, and how the two are combined, that you can't really have a creative impulse without some level of love. You have to love a character in order to write them properly. You have to love the process of writing music in order to write good music, I think. And I think that also how people create each other is very important in the movie. That like he is really a lost person in a way, and gets lost and meets a person who sort of jolts him out of his pattern of living. Because we all, I think, have a pattern of living, and sometimes we need to get lost in order to find our way again, you know? And that's really what the movie's about.
Mm-hmm. You're talking about creativity and the fact that your character struggles with it and he has to redefine himself. What are the sources of creativity for you as an actor, as inspiration that you really, draw upon?
People like Rebecca. I mean, actors, we aren't painters, we aren't writers, we aren't even musicians who can do it as a solitary act. We need each other. We're dependent on each other. We're dependent on collaboration. Probably more than any other art form, if you want to call acting an art form. I sometimes struggle with what acting is in general. But I look to others, completely to others. You sort of don't know, like if you read a great script like Rebecca's or others, you take that leap of faith, like, okay, this is a great script. I'm very interested in doing this. But then there's so many other components. The other actors you're working with, the chemistry with the other actors or lack thereof, the personal relationship with everybody on set. I love making movies because it's such a beautiful bubble of collaboration, but it's a roll of the dice every time, and sometimes it's better than you expected, hopefully.
Would you describe yourself as a more of intuitive actor, or of someone who bases his performances on some rational research and rational analysis?
No, I don't really do a ton of homework. I just sort of root it in who I'm playing across, what they're giving me. It's like tennis. It really is that. And listening. I feel like sometimes for me when I over prepare, or I know actors who learn everybody's lines, not just their own, it seems to be, it starts closing windows to what possibly can happen on the day, in the scene, that I always try to sort of remain open to.
I think that's such an important point. It's like watching even the scene in the bar between you and Marissa Tomei, like that scene to me is like a perfect masterclass in listening and responding, and how every single take was different. It was like, just the constant shifting of energies, and because they're both so awake, and that's really what acting is.
And directing too. I mean, I think the great directors, they have it all mapped out in their heads. It's beautiful. It's almost like they're already in the editing. They can see it, and you want to trust the director having that clarity of how they see it, but also remaining open to what happens on the day, because reality is what it is. And if the scene calls for a sunny day and it's pouring rain, and you don't have the time to it, you have to change your thinking, or with an actor, with an idea, without anybody being a dominant influence on set. I don't like it when anybody's sort of dominant and like controlling it, but you always remain open, everybody, and then the greatest things come out of that.
So you have to be also adaptable and versatile.
Right, but with clarity of vision, obviously, at the same time. So it's tricky. It's really hard, because some people think a vision of something is controlling it, and that's not necessarily the case. It's more nuanced than that.
Rebecca, do you frown upon this romantic comedy category that your movie is sometimes described as, or on the opposite of that? You enjoy that genre, and this was your goal to actually work within the framework of that genre here with She Came to Me?
Well, it's hard because in a way, romantic comedy, as we see it now, I feel less connected to as a genre than, say, screwball or sort of romantic comedies in the 1940s and 30s and 40s from the United States. And I'm only saying that.
Preston Sturges.
Yeah, Preston Sturges, for example. Yeah, Howard Hawks.
Directors, brilliant.
And because it's really only because I feel like the form has been a little bit debased, and also, you know, somebody like Billy Wilder in The Apartment, that's an example of a movie where it's genuinely sad at times and genuinely funny at times. So this movie combines drama and comedy in ways that where you push in completely into one tone and then you veer away and you're in another tone and so on. So the only problem I have with the idea of romantic comedy when people walk in is that they have a certain kind of expectation, and I think they should just like stay open and just take the movie for what it is. But there's definitely a lot of romance and there's definitely some comedy.
Yeah, addicted to romance, as Bruce Springsteen put it. Yeah, but I think screwball comedy was a version of romantic comedy, yeah, but with maybe more grit to it, with maybe more humor to it, and more. And really, when we're talking about The Apartment by Billy Wilder, it's also a film which is quite courageous in many themes, very not prudent at all.
No.
There were no rules. They're inventing as they went along because it was so early in the film history, especially after sound, where your language can be part of your lovely back and forth. But they just were experimenting as they went along and successful. And then it's sort of, as genres happen, everybody starts to fall into categories and expectations, as Rebecca said. And who's to say you can't cross paths and all of that? I think like the fantasy, which I've done a number of things on, I think fantasy only works best when it's truthful and rooted in some sort of reality. But it's a fantasy genre, but what we relate to as humans is the reality of the truthfulness of characters, the connection, the relationships.
Right.
But it's fantasy. But
the way that Billy Wilder treated eroticism, for example, and sexuality in The Apartment, very straight on, courageous.
Before the censors really started to attack.
Very much so. And our film has a kind of countercultural underpinning in the sense of like, in various different senses. It's asking questions about who we are as a country. It's kind of it has a lot of rather serious themes in it to do with class, race, age, and pushes against assumptions of how we are meant to be as you know, in our culture, but in a way that's fairly gentle because it goes with the tone and it kind of just is all part of the narrative.
Mm-hmm. Rebecca, Peter, thank you very much for talking to us.
Okay. Thank you so much.